Greetings, my name is Chamomile and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're looking at Adari Sector and 3rd Steel Blade Command with the Slice in the Inner Rim. Adari Sector is the domain of the Adarians, given to them to rule according to their law and traditions under the Republic. Normally, sectors lost a lot of autonomy under the Empire, but for some reason the Adari Sector was allowed to full-on secede from the Empire. They did still pay significant tribute, so I guess as long as the resources kept flowing, the Empire didn't care if Adari had fully independent domestic policy. It probably helped that the rigidly hierarchical caste system of the Adarians wasn't exactly providing a model of the better life that the Empire was keeping from the galaxy. The Rebel Alliance tried to stir up a rebellion against the Adarian upper class to get a foothold in the sector, but it never went anywhere. Greetings, my name is Chamomile and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're looking at Barma Sector and 3rd Steel Blade Command with the Slice in the Colonies. Barma Sector's capital is the planet Dakshi. Rebels beamed propaganda out from the nearby uninhabited AX system and had a permanent relay station on asteroid AX-456, which the Empire found and destroyed a few months before the Battle of Yavin. After Yavin, Dakshi rose up against the Empire, hoping to break away like Outer Rim planets like Mon Cala, but Dakshi was way too close to the core for even an overstretched Empire to overlook. The planet was quickly resubjugated and massacred, and it still has a noticeably lower population to this day, nearly 30 years after joining the New Republic soon after its declaration on Coruscant. Greetings, my name is Chamomile and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're looking at Bormea Sector and the 3rd Steel Blade Command of the Arrowhead and the Core. Bormea Sector is home to not one, not two, but 3 different planets colonized by Coruscanti sleeper ships in the pre-Republic era, although in the case of Chandrilla they hopped off the boat and like a week later the Mother World showed up with a hyperdrive to let them know they may as well have just stayed home and waited for faster-than-light travel to be discovered. Chandrilla was one of the founding members of the Republic and, because it was so recently settled at the time, they called themselves the first agri-world of the Republic. Chandrilla is now famously the homeworld of Mon Mothma, first Supreme Chancellor of the New Republic and first capital planet of the New Republic, although it rotates through several different worlds including Coruscant and, well, not Hosnian anymore on account of, Anyway, Chandrilla has had surprisingly little impact on galactic history besides being Mon Mothma's homeworld and a founding member of the Republic. They were taken over by the Sith in the closing years of the New Sith Wars when the Republic had basically disintegrated, although Chandrilla was never part of that disintegration. While most Republic sectors were effectively independent nations loosely allied with one another against the Sith, the Arrowhead region still sent senators to Coruscant and was still bound by the laws of the Senate. Well, except for Chandrilla on account of having been conquered by the Sith for a few years. The Sith got shoved back off the planet pretty quick, though. There's got to be some kind of history for why this planet wound up as capital of the Bormea Sector over the equally prominent Brental and Korolog, but there's no record of exactly why. Brental and Korolog have independent Senate representation and are thus technically single-system sectors unto themselves, but Chandrilla, the smallest of the 3 in population by far, is for some reason the capital planet with dominion over the hundreds of minor one-town worlds scattered throughout the Bormea Sector. Maybe Chandrilla gets to be sector capital to try and level it out with the other 2? If so, it's not nearly enough. A few hundred planets with less than 1 million inhabitants on average is not even doubling Chandrilla's population of roughly 1 billion, while Korolog is pushing the limits of self-sustainability at around 10 to 15 billion, and if we're being honest, if it were blockaded, it probably wouldn't be able to sustain itself on local agriculture, while Brental is way past sustainability with over 60 billion inhabitants, in that gray zone where it's fed by agri-world like an ecumenopolis, but still has less than half of its land area covered in city. Not a lot less than half, though. It's nearly an ecumenopolis. Brental is a trade powerhouse at the intersection of the Prelemian trade route and the Hydean Way, along with many other smaller hyperroutes like the Brental-Denon route and the Commodore run. Brental is a democracy, but it's also got a culture where politics is seen as second to commerce, so its hundreds of hereditary merchant aristocratic houses are viewed as more important than senate positions or mayoral offices of various cities. Not to say that they don't notice the importance of political office, just that the patriarch or matriarch of a merchant house is generally seen as a more prestigious role than a mayor, and the head of one of the great houses is viewed as more prestigious than the planet's senator, although the definition of a great house is somewhat fluid. It's basically like saying the S-tier houses, where there's some that are big and wealthy enough to definitely be included, while the vast majority of Brental's hundreds of merchant houses are definitely not included. But there's also a few that are kind of borderline, and it depends on who you ask because there is no formal definition. Brental revolted against the Galactic Empire and joined the Rebel Alliance in the final months of the Galactic Civil War before the New Republic was officially proclaimed on Coruscant, and the Empire and Rebellion fought over the planet between Endor and Jakku, with the Rebels carving out a stronghold there before the Battle of Jakku. Korlog has a ton of corporations on it. None of them are like the big names. This isn't Sinar or Quat Drive Yards or Industrial Automata, but there's still like 7 major corps headquartered here. Aether Hypernautics, Core Guard Security Services, Danthe Artifice Limited, Gowix Computers, Gwaine Spices, Corden Outfitting and Surveying, and the Manson Corporation. Korlog was pretty pro-Imperial during the Galactic Civil War, but the New Republic wasn't interested in letting any part of Bormea sector join the Inner Systems Imperial Remnant, not when that might put Chandrilla so plainly within striking distance of a vengeful empire. Turned out to be just as well, since the Inner Systems Remnant collapsed almost immediately, and all its members joined the New Republic anyway. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're looking at unincorporated systems in the colonies and the core in 3rd Steel Blade Command. These systems are part of no specific sector and each have independent Senate representation, which is much more common as you get closer to the core. The only unincorporated core world is Koran, a pretty unimportant manufacturing world. The core has lots of unincorporated worlds in general, but 3rd Steel Blade Command barely reaches into the core, and most of what it does have is in the Bormea and DARPA sectors. The Squalrus species are native to planet Ifmix 6 and were one of the first species to join the Republic after its foundation, so they're obviously behind species like the Duros, who were founding members, but still, that's neat. Ifmix 6 is covered in tornadoes, which is also kind of neat. Yabal Opa is a planet-wide university. The Grand Warden of the university is effectively the dictator of the planet, although still subject to the Republic and later Imperial law, and the entire surface area of the planet is part of the campus. That does include a lot of infrastructure, like a regular university campus has dormitories and a food court, and thus will have kitchens, a sewage system, maintenance buildings, and so forth. There are some buildings that aren't dedicated directly to education, but to supporting infrastructure for the classrooms. Likewise with Yabal Opa, which does have farms, factories, and apartment blocks, but it's all supporting infrastructure dedicated to and owned by the planet-wide university. Lofi Star is a planet that has jealously guarded its pristine natural wildernesses for millennia, and the Ace Entertainment Corporation, a front for Sibara the Hutt, butted heads with the planetary government when it expanded its resort, the Ace of Sabers, beyond what regulations allowed. Lofi Star is an entire planet. One resort adding a few dozen extra acres was obviously not going to ruin the whole thing, but Lofi Star officials feared that letting it slide would start a feeding frenzy by every resort on the planet. Raithal has a naval academy that was so popular during the Clone Wars that they had to open up a second branch on Korlog over in Bormea sector. They have the dubious honor of having given Paleon his officer training, the man who would go on to lead the Imperial Remnant Shadow Council for most of its existence. He got overshadowed every time someone more famous like Thrawn or Snoke showed up, but Paleon was the guy who kept the Imperial Remnant together in between major villains. The Karita Naval Academy was an entirely different academy and a less popular one. There were anti-Imperial protests outside the Academy at one point, during which Cassian Andor's father was allegedly killed. No. Here's the thing, according to official standards, the source that claimed Andor's father was killed at this protest is reliable. But it clearly isn't, because that's clearly false. For anyone wondering why I incorporate a lot of questionably true facts into these videos, this is why. They're all questionably true. The supposed standards of quality for what's true and what isn't do not actually work, and if I stuck only to events like the Battle of Yavin that are genuinely, unquestionably accurate, this whole series would be 15 minutes long and wouldn't tell you anything you didn't know already. Wakil Mui is a forest world where the Republic and later the Empire trained soldiers in forest combat tactics, so this is where the stormtroopers deployed to Endor trained on forest fighting. It doesn't seem to have done them much good against the Ewoks, but not only are Ewoks stronger and more dangerous than they look, they are tiny bears after all, but also the Empire standards for training were a massive step down from not only the clone troopers, but even the Republic military of old. Emperor Palpatine was trying to create a new military tradition from whole cloth, and guys like Grand Moff Tarkin had a crippling combination of a lack of real experience and extreme arrogance. The Imperial Officer Corps that came out of the Clone Wars was used to piggybacking on the military traditions of the Mandalorian Neo-Crusaders, who had been used as the blueprint for clone trooper training by the Kaminoans. The naval officers, in their arrogance, attributed their Clone Wars proficiency to their own tactical capabilities and assumed they could match that level of capability leading stormtroopers or Imperial Army troopers. but those guys were mostly trained by the Imperial Officer Corps themselves, and they sort of ad hoc together a training regime based on what they had osmosed from the clone troopers they used to command, what they had inherited from the Republic Judicial Corps, a force that relied exclusively on small arms and squad-level tactics, and their own hazy understanding of the Republic military tradition prior to the Ruusan Reformation. That seems insane, but it's true. Republic naval academies didn't offer extensive training in ground warfare because they are naval academies, and arrogance and contempt for the foes of the Empire was so ubiquitous in the culture of the military that it was practically unheard of for an officer to think they should do the kind of historical research where you actually read primary documents and closely study the militaries of the past. They thought they were familiar with the Republic military tradition because they knew what a Republic trooper looked like. Almost none of them ever made a serious study of either the Mandalorian Neo-Crusader doctrine, nor the doctrine of the Republic troopers during comparable eras like the Great Galactic Wars. And thanks to the backstabbing nature of the Imperial military, the ones who did study and adapt the techniques of successful historical military traditions mostly had their accomplishments stolen by officers whose only skill was brown-nosing. It wasn't until the Galactic Civil War, when they were tested against a formidable adversary, that their deficiencies became obvious, especially after Yavin, when rebel ranks swelled with Imperial defectors, including a lot of those officers who had taken their jobs seriously, studied the doctrine of the clones and Mandalorians in the Old Republic era, and then gotten passed over for promotion when someone else stole credit. Arcania is a planet obsessed with genetic perfection through mad science. They were allegedly aligned with the Sith Empire since before the Great Hyperspace War, and on the one hand, I buy that Arcania made contact with the Sith Empire ahead of the Republic and kept it under wraps, but on the other hand, the relevant records claim Arcania was enveloped entirely in Sith territory. Fucking how? They're in the northern dependencies. This region was part of the Republic by the time of the First Alsacan conflict. The Vishas Tuwan library complex was an underground super bunker, so I buy that Arcania may have had this library and drawn in Sith lords to study and experiment there, because that's the kind of thing that can happen in secret despite being firmly within Republic space, which Arcania definitely was. Vishas Tuwan was said to have been destroyed by the end of the Great Hyperspace War, the first war with the Sith, and the Jedi established a temple there to cleanse the taint of the dark side. This temple went on to train Ulic Qel-Droma, the Jedi who fell to the dark side, re-established the Sith Empire, and took Exar Kun as his Sith apprentice, the guy who succeeded Ulic Qel-Droma as Sith Emperor and nearly destroyed the Republic and the Jedi both. So, didn't do a great job of taint cleansing there. Arcania would go on to be staunchly pro-Republic throughout the Great Galactic Wars and the New Sith Wars though, so I guess it did ultimately work, even if there were some final spasms of corruption on the planet. Arcania was ripped in half by civil war over mad science minutiae. You might think one side or another opposed the mad science that Arcania had been engaged in for millennia at that point, but no, it was purely a fight over who should be in charge of the mad science. This was in the late Republic era, and Mace Windu helped restore order. Supposedly, he was assisted by the Iron Knights, a species of silica-based life who interacted with the world through droid bodies but were nevertheless living creatures who could use the Force. This seems really far-fetched to me. Being a planet of mad geneticists, the Arcanians offered their services as a cloning hub for the Republic during the Clone Wars, but the Arcanian cloning tradition was not about the production of stable lines of identical workers, custom-built for a specific job. Their biology and culture alike crafted to produce armies of whatever sort was needed, including, ultimately, a literal military army for the Galactic Republic. Rather, the Arcanians created bespoke super beings in the hopes of creating a broadly generalized master race, and since there's no objective criteria by which master race could possibly be determined, they spent most of their time knifing each other in the back over which exact trait should be prioritized. They also paid minimal attention to the culture and upbringing of their creations. Some of them viewed their creations as children and raised them accordingly, others assumed that the experiments themselves, being endowed with superior intelligence or courage or whatever other specific trait that Arcanian science team had decided was paramount, would figure out how to build the ideal society themselves. While the Kaminoans produced clones as a product fit for purpose, the Arcanians produced clones in pursuit of ideological perfection, and the vague goals resulted in lots of bespoke creations that mostly blended together to create a soup of extreme genetic diversity and racial division. All this to say, they were never in any condition to produce a clone army and got ignored by the late Republic and the Empire. The Empire did still control the planet just like the Republic did, of course, and rebel forces were fighting the Empire there within weeks of the Battle of Endor, as the whole Empire started to disintegrate after the death of the Emperor. This was one of the first rumbles of what would eventually lead to battles for planets like Brental, way behind the battle lines being drawn between the rebel fleet in the trailing sectors and the Empire in the core. After Jakku, Arcania became an independent system rather than join the New Republic because they didn't want to deal with the Senate passing laws to prohibit replacing eyeball fluid with pure Bacta just to see what happens. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're looking at Corfelli sector and the 3rd Steel Blade Command of the northern dependencies of the expansion region. Some parts of 3rd Steel Blade Command are famous core sectors with planets like Chandrilla and Brentall, and some of them are places like Corfelli, where, hey, did you know that the Republic turned back a Sith invasion force of the Corfellian asteroids during the new Sith Wars? And did you know the Rebel Alliance shook the Empire's Steel Blade Command by winning some skirmishes at Jestan during the Midrim Offensive? Not really a story to either of those, but here at the fringe of Steel Blade Command, we do get stories of Outer Rim powers knocking on the Core's door, although there was never a decisive battle fought in this sector. Some sectors don't have a story, and this sector is basically one of those. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're looking at Darlon sector and the 3rd Steel Blade Command of the Slice in the Inner Rim. Darlon is home to Verdon Ka, homeworld of the Vuvrians, these fuzzy arthropod guys. They're said to be inquisitive problem solvers by nature, but are rarely seen off their home planet, which I guess explains why they have basically no presence at all in galactic history. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're looking at DARPA sector and 3rd Steel Blade Command of the Arrowhead and the Core. DARPA sector was also known as the Esselian Empire for most of galactic history, but the Esselian Empire's debts caught up with it, and the whole government went defunct during the Clone Wars. While sector Moffs were de facto dictators if they're assigned sectors in the Imperial era, this was usually covered up with the fig leaf of emergency powers, Moffs being military officers given the power to override sector law in order to defend the people of the sector in an emergency. With the Esselian government going defunct during the Clone Wars, though, the truth of the Moffs was a lot more open in the Empire's DARPA sector, openly and directly ruled by the sector Moff. After being reincorporated into the New Republic, it became a standard colonial democratic sector capitalized out of Esselis, although Raltier retains independent Senate representation. Raltier was a rebel-sympathetic planet during the Galactic Civil War, and as Imperial legitimacy gave way to the Tarkin Doctrine, Lord Commodore Tion of the Imperial Navy, no relation, was sent to root out the rebels, which he did primarily via orbital bombardment just before the Battle of Yavin. Guerrilla war across Raltier lasted 4 years from Yavin until after Endor, when the Raltier resistance struck at the planetary shields to welcome in the New Republic fleet fresh off their victory at Jakku. Rinal got treated with kid gloves by the Empire for some reason. Despite being home to a Jedi chapter house, the planet was left totally unscathed by the Galactic Civil War. A medical powerhouse, Rinal converted the old chapter house into a medical research facility, and the Empire was uncharacteristically chill about it, never sending any Imperial stormtroopers to glare at the doctors and rifle through their storage units looking for stray Padawans. Just a few systems over, Raltier is getting orbitally bombarded in retaliation for pro-rebel graffiti, but Rinal is cool, I guess. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're looking at Greater Pluriod and the 3rd Steel Blade Command of the northern dependencies of the expansion region. Coruscant's planet government was forcibly deposed and replaced with a more pro-imperial government during the Galactic Civil War. Journalists on the planet to cover a major swoop race were detained for several weeks during the transition, which is why we still don't know exactly how violent the transition was or why the Empire felt the need. Maybe they just wanted to shove a planet around to show that they could. In any case, it certainly couldn't have been a full-scale planetary invasion because that would have been obvious no matter how many journalists were imprisoned, but it's not clear where this fell on the scale from arrest being made to massacre at the Capitol building. Coruscant also had the dubious honor of being one of the most core-word planets ruled by Zinj's short-lived empire, an imperial remnant founded after the disintegration of the empire at the Battle of Jakku, which managed to annoy both the New Republic and several other imperial remnants for a few years before the Solo fleet shattered it. The initial attack at Coruscant immediately after Jakku was repulsed by Zinj's forces, but Zinj's empire went on to disintegrate under pressure from the X-Wing Rangers before his fleet was destroyed by General Solo at Selagus. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're looking at Haldane sector and 3rd Steel Blade Command in the Slice in the Colonies. Haldane Sector was a hotbed of activity by the Justice Action Group, a partisan-esque rebel group that never joined the Alliance, and which the Empire crushed soon after the Battle of Yavin. The planet Argai Minor hosted an Imperial fortress that would hold out against the formal declaration of the New Republic, but as with the rest of 3rd Steel Blade, everything that didn't surrender was quickly conquered by the Rebel fleet, in this case mostly by X-Wing Rangers from Alphabet Squadron, who cracked open Train Haas Citadel, a fortress that had turned the battle for the planet into a meat grinder. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're looking at Halley Sector and 3rd Steel Blade Command of the Slice in the Expansion region. Planet Denovia is a minor mining world that I only bring up because they supposedly have cool-looking rain hoods, which nobody has ever taken a picture of or illustrated. Someone get on that. I want to see the cool rain hoods. The only other planet of note out here is Elaud, which had a pro-Imperial uprising in the immediate aftermath of the declaration of the New Republic on Coruscant, which Republic forces put down. The New Republic went out of its way to avoid echoing the reconquest of the Rim by the Republic-turned-Empire at the end of the Clone Wars, but they didn't arrive at that policy immediately after declaring themselves on Coruscant, and they were never going to let Imperial powers remain within striking distance of planets of personal importance to major rebel leaders like Admiral Akbar, Garmbel Iblis, Chewbacca, and even Mon Mothma, who was generally the good cop in the negotiations with the Inner Systems Remnant. Leia Organa held up the bad cop end of negotiations, the "I will kill as many Imperials as it takes to ensure that there will never be another massacre like Alderaan" angle, while Mon Mothma had more of the "let's keep my friend here happy before she fires up the turbo lasers" angle. But in 3rd Steel Blade, the oversector that included Chandrila, Mon Mothma's home planet, even Mon Mothma's patience for the Imperial remnants was pretty short. They didn't test her a whole lot. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're talking about the freestanding systems of the Inner Rim in 3rd Steel Blade Command. These are planets not part of any sector, single systems that have independent Senate representation, or in some cases they are planets part of some sector, but I can't figure out which one because Palpatine purged the bureaucracy and no one's bothered uploading the New Republic records to the HoloNet yet. We lost centuries of knowledge to Palpatine's purge and we haven't gotten it all back, even some very basic stuff like the sector boundaries for the Inner Rim, colonies, and core. Well, and the Deep Core, but there's only like 3 sectors in the Deep Core, so whatever. I covered a few planets like this that are fully enveloped in the borders of another sector and thus colloquially part of those sectors, but these ones stand alone. They're all over 3rd Steel Blade Command, so there's not going to be much of a consistent theme or story to this one. Driaria is home to the Driarian Defense Conglomerate, a minor defense contractor who sprung up to meet demand during the Clone Wars and later the Imperial era. Despite its moderate economic prominence, nothing exciting ever happened there. Aeolus was a world where the rebels supposedly resettled Alderaanian refugees. The Empire tracked them down and attacked the world, driving them back into space. Obroa Sky is a famous library world with the most extensive archives of DNA samples of different species in the galaxy, with over 300,000 stored. Not all sentient species, mind you, just species in general, sentient or non. Per Lupello was the headquarters of the Imperial-era crime lord Reyes. Nothing ever really happened there, but Reyes comes up in other stories sometimes. Relata is part of the long arm of the gambling empire that reaches across the Perlemian trade route, famous for its casinos. Shalom has an insane tariff scheme, and according to rumor, Han Solo smuggled a vegetable called Jandara found exclusively on planet Jubilar past the tariffs after leaving the New Republic to return to smuggling for some reason. Talon 9 is a droid-run factory world that discouraged organics from visiting by only speaking the droid language of binary to approaching ships for things like docking information, a practice that was discontinued after 2 organic-piloted cargo ships collided in orbit. Tanab is an unexceptional agri-world where nothing ever happened, but it's pretty. Supposedly, Luke Skywalker's last action as a military officer of the New Republic was fighting an Imperial remnant on planet Mindor, where the Stormtrooper Legion stationed there ignored the peace treaty between the Imperial remnants and the New Republic and fought to the last man. According to the story, the Legion was led by a man named Kronal, who codenamed himself Shadowspawn after the fall of the Empire, a practitioner of Sith alchemy as part of one of Emperor Palpatine's secret projects. It's not confirmed if Shadowspawn actually existed, nor is it totally clear exactly what happened on Mindor, but definitely Luke left the New Republic military to focus on his new Jedi Order soon after Jakku. That's not a big surprise, the New Republic was demilitarizing. Leia left the military to focus on her political career around the same time, but there might have been a specific reason for it. Leia is said to have been present for the same fight, so maybe she left the military at the same time for the same reason. But also, I mean, Yeah, the X-Wing Rangers continued skirmishing and raiding the Imperial remnants continuously straight until the Cold War with the First Order, but major military actions concluded pretty soon after Jakku and the official peace treaty, Zinj and the Sutric hegemony notwithstanding. Azrat is a planet that reveres the holy children of Azrat, orphans who are blessed by fate in some quasi-mystical way. The children are considered to speak with the wisdom of babes, which is dumb, but Azrat takes it really seriously. The Empire targeted them as a potential center of power, opposing them, but this is an inner rim planet and the targets are children, so they had to do it on the sly, framing it as an outer rim scum hit. They sent Dengar, an Imperial assassin disguised as a bounty hunter, but Dengar decided that killing a dozen children was a line he wasn't going to cross, and he adopted his cover story as a bounty hunter, retreating into the Outer Rim to escape the consequences of desertion and making a living through actual bounty hunting. And then he boarded a Super Star Destroyer to take a bounty from Darth Vader himself, which required either incredible guts or else the Death Drive was fully in control by that point. Bogdan had a civil war going on and off for about 1,000 years that left the planet totally devastated, the orbit with debris from over 1,000 destroyed starships, and the population reduced to almost nothing. The Bando Gora used the moon Kolma as their secret base while plotting galactic domination through poisoning death sticks. This is always an insane plan that couldn't actually work, not that many people use death sticks, but it could cause all kinds of chaos. The Bando Gora were led by Count Dooku's wayward apprentice Kamari Vosa, so Count Dooku sicked the galaxy's greatest bounty hunters on her to find a template for Palpatine's clone army as part of their conspiracy to bring down the Republic. Jango Fett won, chasing down the Bando Gora from death stick dealers on Coruscant through a manufacturing plant run by a Dug crime lord on Malastare, and tracking them back to Kolma. Jango Fett's primary rival in the hunt was Montross, another rogue Mandalorian holding to the old ways, and one who'd betrayed Jaster Muriel to the Death Watch during a battle on Corta 6. Also in 3rd Steel Blade Command, go figure, between the true Mandalorians and the Death Watch, two infighting factions of Mandalorian traditionalists. Jaster Muriel was the Mandalorian who'd adopted Jango Fett into the Mandalorian way, in the tradition of Mandalore the Ultimate opening up the way to outsiders who prove themselves worthy. And the standards for children are pretty low, as you might expect. As long as an existing Mandalorian decides to adopt a 5-year-old, the other Mandalorians just kind of humor him. Jango killed Montross and Kamari Vosa, Dooku retrieved Vosa's lightsabers and later passed them on to his next apprentice Asajj Ventress, and Jango Fett became the template for the clone army and pseudo-clone father to Boba Fett. Kala is ruled by the Colicoid Sovereign Nest, a fully independent system, never part of the Republic. They'd played both sides of the Sith Wars, selling weapons to both the Sith Empire and the Republic, and collaborated with the Sith Empire on something called Project Hexapod, an initiative to mutate the Colicoids into some kind of super Colicoid, basically creating a potentially Sith-aligned alternative to the Arcanians. Much like the Arcanians, it never really went anywhere. In the Clone Wars, the Colicoids sided with the CIS, making weapons for them like the Droidekas, Buzz Droids, and Tri-Fighters. This made them pretty much the sole target of 3rd Steel Blade Command. Now, most planets have a puny population, and most planets that have a large enough population to fight a truly planetary war just don't bother to fight the government, so the Republic-turned-Empire strategic commands do not have nearly enough firepower to actually subjugate every planet in their boundaries. Plus, inner commands like Steel Blade, Shadow Hand, and Azure Hammer got used as reinforcements for any front that needed them in the Clone Wars, so 3rd Steel Blade never threw their full firepower at Kala because they kept getting battalions peeled off to reinforce 12th Cerulean Spear's attempts to batter down the CIS capital region in the Tion cluster through fortress worlds like Felucia. All this to say, it's not actually very surprising that Kala resisted a Republic invasion until near the end of the Clone Wars, especially with the CIS running their fleet deep into enemy territory to refuel at Kala and defend the planet's orbit to prevent the Republic from getting the orbital superiority they'd need to crack the shielded factories on the planet's surface. These were the source of the powerful Droideka and Scorpionic Annihilator droids, so Republic ground assaults faced armies comprised entirely of these elite units. The invasion tied up a ton of Colicoid super droids that kept the number of Droidekas and Scorpionics available on other fronts limited, but it didn't succeed until near the end when the CIS was imploding across all fronts. You'd think Champala would have some interesting history to it, at least surrounding the figure of Mas Amedda, Emperor Palpatine's chief political advisor, and the guy that several Jedi suspected might be a secret Sith Lord during the Clone Wars, but this guy mostly just managed the Senate and got to hang on after the dissolution of the Senate just because Palpatine kinda liked having him around. He's very regal looking, helps give him a sort of gravitas, I guess. Champala does have really extreme tides, so the native Chagrians build their cities so that the lower floors can be fully submerged half the time and it's fine. Some of them don't even have stairs or elevators because they're expected to only be used when underwater and you can just swim through hatches. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're looking at the Kitalak regions in the 3rd Steel Blade Command with the Slice in the Inner Rim. The Kitalak regions are the fully sovereign domain of a confederation between the Kitalak, Murauchan, and Tokoyan species, who have a mystical belief that each of the 3 species of their confederation represents 1/3 of a greater whole, not just in the mundane, pragmatic sense that a higher population can engage in more specialization, and therefore increase both the quantity and quality of economic outputs, but in the spiritual sense that each of the 3 of them represented a trait which, in combination with the other 2, formed a perfectly symbiotic whole. No word on exactly what that trait or combination of traits actually is, though. The Kitalak regions are kind of reclusive. Each of the 3 species rule exactly 63 systems in the region, with another 3 systems open to all, including outsiders. That might sound like a lot, and without exact census data, it's hard to know for sure if it is or isn't, but bear in mind that in every other sector there are hundreds or even thousands of inhabited worlds, but the vast majority of them are places like Ferrix and Trask, one-town planets with a population of less than 100,000, so probably the Kitalak regions have a population slightly higher than average for a sector, since they have 3 species homeworlds instead of just 1, but still well below that of sectors with ecumonopoli, because a couple hundred one-town planets just doesn't even add up to 1 billion additional inhabitants. Galactic census data is always unreliable. Tatooine's official population is about 300,000, but it's so poorly documented that estimates as high as 50 million aren't totally unreasonable. But we straight up don't have population figures or much other information on Kitalak because they never had any information recorded about them before Palpatine's purge of the bureaucracy. The Kitalak regions were an allied region of the Old Republic, a fully sovereign government that was neither subject to the laws of the Senate nor had any representation in the Senate. As an allied region, they joined the Republic side of the Clone Wars, and was therefore officially part of 3rd Steel Blade Command. Clone troopers were allowed in and out of the Kitalak regions how they pleased, including the many systems that were normally closed to outsiders as an emergency war power, and that never came up during the Clone Wars, but when the Republic was reorganized into the Galactic Empire, those strategic commands became units of military dictatorship, which meant that the Kitalak regions were subject to the Grand Moff of 3rd Steel Blade Command, and the Sector Moff in charge of defending the Kitalak region with Republic forces now had permanent emergency powers to ignore whatever laws he liked in an emergency, and he was the one in charge of deciding what qualified as an emergency. The Kitalak regions didn't even have any Senate representation, which means despite being an inner rim sector, it was shockingly easy for the Empire to get away with shit like enslaving the Murauchan species. A lot of the Murauchan joined the Rebel Alliance, and the Kitalak regions joined the New Republic after the Battle of Jakku, having decided that as long as a galactic-scale government existed and could, in practice, declare the Kitalak regions subject to it whenever they wanted, then the Kitalak regions were better off as part of a government than an allied region. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're looking at Laren Sector in 3rd Steel Blade Command to the northern dependencies of the Inner Rim. Laren Sector is the domain of the Philordian species of planet Philordis, given to them to rule according to their own law and tradition within the Republic. They were a member of the Trade Federation, but got out just a year before the blockade of Naboo to join the Metatheran cartel instead. 2 years later, the cartel claimed that the organization had brought prestige to both Philordis and the other major member of the cartel, Caramon, and while it didn't say so explicitly, I have to imagine that what he meant, especially since he said prestige and not wealth, is that the Philordians hadn't disgraced themselves by sticking with the Trade Federation during the crisis on Naboo. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're looking at Lokris Sector in the 3rd Steel Blade Command of the Slice in the Expansion region. The first is Agriworld and sector capital Sermeria, whose Senator Lannis Reed accused the Techno Union of being up to no good when their material purchases didn't match their industrial output, indicating that they were creating a lot of products that they weren't selling nor publicly storing anywhere, and that the missing materials matched those used for production of battle droids. The Techno Union funded a huge media campaign against Reed, and it worked. He got a reputation as a conspiracy theorist with an axe to grind, wound up losing his campaign for re-election, and later, supposedly, committed suicide by firing 2 blaster bolts into the back of his head. Okay, that's not literally true. He jumped out of an airspeeder a few hundred yards up, but considering how badly the Techno Union wanted him out of politics, I'm not convinced he jumped out of that speeder. He was totally vindicated a few years later when the Techno Union had several years' worth of stockpiled battle droids to commit to the Clone Wars. The other planet of note is an industrial world called Ter Abyss. They have a planetary democracy, but not a super stable one. The opposition leader, Tholote Belef, got assassinated by a Mandalorian mercenary a few years before the official declaration of the First Order. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're looking at Lofi Star Sector and 3rd Steel Blade Command of the northern dependencies of the expansion region. Planet Jasbina was a pro-Imperial planet with sweet dinosaurs whose king Prepperdenko faked a defection to the Rebel Alliance, asking the rebels for help finding his kidnapped daughter, Princess Saena. Supposedly, Luke Skywalker himself came to assist the king in hopes of bringing Jasbina into the Alliance, but it turned out Saena had gone rogue to try and orchestrate a pro-rebel uprising on the planet, and Luke had led the pro-Imperial forces of King Prepperdenko straight to her. Allegedly, Darth Vader came chasing Luke, but Princess Saena escaped, rallied the people, and fought off Darth Vader? Okay, the story doesn't say she personally fought off Darth Vader, and maybe Vader was only there interested in Luke and left largely out of apathy towards the local political situation once Luke was gone, but I don't know, I'd still expect Vader to fly into a rage and wreck things resubjugating the planet, rather than shrug his shoulders, write it off as a loss, and just leave. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're talking about Noain in 3rd Steel Blade Command of the northern dependencies of the Inner Rim. Noain is an allied region of the Republic, an independent nation that was enveloped by the expanding Republic in the early Republic era and remained friendly but uncommitted until the Mandalorian Wars. The Mandalorians eventually overran Noain, and so Noain became a formal military ally of the Republic and later the Empire. As part of the unified defense of 3rd Steel Blade Command in the Clone Wars, Republic generals had the power to override local laws in service of the war effort, which was then made a permanent authority for the Grand Moff of 3rd Steel Blade when the Republic was reorganized into the Galactic Empire. Nothing ever really came of this though, and Noain rode out the whole Galactic Civil War without really getting involved. The ISB did have access to its borders, although it's not clear if they had formal access or if they just didn't ask and Noain didn't argue, especially since the Empire only ever operated on Fatim, an uninhabited but inhabitable planet whose mountains were home to the Jedi Library and artifact archive called the Halls of Knowledge. After the halls were sacked as part of Order 66, the ISB ran a dueling tournament out of the abandoned halls through a front organization to try and catch rogue Jedi or other Force sensitives. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're looking at Orus Sector and 3rd Steel Blade Command of the northern dependencies of the Inner Rim. The most important planet in Orus Sector by far is Chazwa, a major trade world that was fortified by the Empire to resist the Rebel fleet after Endor, just in case the Rebels attacked from the Tion cluster. That never happened, and Chazwa surrendered after the New Republic was declared on Coruscant. The minor worlds are all the cool ones in this sector, though. Hijarna has an abandoned alien fortress left behind by an unknown species that was driven off when the planet was invaded by another, also unknown species. The architecture doesn't match any known civilization in galactic history, and it was all already over by the time the Republic got there in the early Republic era. Planet Mantessa is an especially deadly death world, totally covered in jungles full of deadly predators. Planet Podaris' only livable surface is on island mesas that jut up out of stormy oceans. They have a 10-hour day and super extreme seasons with almost continuous hurricanes during spring and autumn that require windbreakers made out of starship hull material to be livable. None of it's important, but a lot of it is cool. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're looking at Prakla Sector in the 3rd Steel Blade Command of the northern dependencies of the expansion region. The major world of Prakla Sector is Kartau. It's mostly a pretty quiet place, although it was the site of some fairly intense fighting early in the Midrim Offensive when, for half a second, it looked like the Rebel Alliance might make it all the way to Mon Mothma's homeworld of Chandrila. There's all of the Inner Rim and the colonies between Kartau and Chandrila, and when the rebels got bogged down on the planet, the dream of punching through to the Arrowhead died, and they refocused elsewhere on the Mid-Rim. But hey, they got to Chandrila eventually, even if it did take another 2.5 years and Endor and Jakku to make it happen. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're looking at Shatom Sector and the 3rd Steel Blade Command of the northern dependencies of the Inner Rim. Shatom Sector is the domain of the Croktari, given to them to rule according to their own laws and traditions under the Republic. Supposedly they are an alien species, and they're even said to have a very nasally voice that sounds strange to human ears, but they have no other description and they're named after their home planet, so while they're probably not humans or Twi'lek or any of your other more common species, I still suspect they're not actually native to Kroktar. Their planetary demonym has just been mistaken for a species name. Maybe they're Celestin or Rhodian, those both sound kind of nasally to humans. Anyway, whatever's up with Kroktar, it's all that's going on up here. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're looking at Shelsha Sector and the 3rd Steel Blade Command of the Slice and the Colonies. My favorite thing about this sector is that records describe it as over 50 light-years wide. So, the complete galaxy is about 120,000 light-years in diameter, and the standard galactic grid is 21 by 21, so one of these squares is about 5,700 light-years to each side. Now, this map doesn't have exact sector boundaries, but as we'll get into, Shelka Sector includes both Teardrop and Shelkanwa, so, yeah. Not only is it over 50 light-years across, it looks like it's probably over 500 light-years across. And these inner sectors are small. Out in the rims, the sectors are all like 2,000 light-years across. Anyway, the Empire had an unusually light presence in Shelsha Sector, with just 2 small garrisons on the minor worlds of Minkring and Chastern IV, leaving completely alone the bigger planets like Shelkanwa and Teardrop. Ran Klinge was a mid-sized planet with hundreds of millions of inhabitants, the southern continent of which exploded into civil war about 10 years after the end of the Clone Wars. The southern continent was the more sparsely populated one, all the big cities were up north, which only makes it weirder that the Empire never did much to resolve the situation. They sent diplomats. The Empire? Diplomats! About 2 years into the conflict, but that didn't work, and at the time of the Battle of Yavin, the conflict was still ongoing. Since Shelsha Sector was buried in the colonies, and thus closer to the core than the Outer Rim, the rebels didn't have a big presence there either. That led to a surprising abundance of pirates in a way you don't usually get down the road from the Arrowhead like this. The local pirate gang were called the Blood Scars, and they operated out of Gepperin for years. After the Battle of Yavin, rebel presence was exploding all over the galaxy, and they started operating in the Shelsha Sector. A weapons shipment intended to help arm all the new recruits got attacked by the Bargleg Swoop Gang on planet Drunost, a vassal of the Blood Scars, and that dragged rebel operatives into a gang war with the Hand of Judgment, a gang of ex-stormtroopers who deserted after refusing to carry out a massacre on Teardrop ordered by the ISB. Emperor Palpatine loved to pit his subordinates against one another with dire consequences for whoever was in last place, so after the loss of the Death Star, every over-sector needed to look busy fighting rebels, knowing that whoever was fighting rebels the least would incur the wrath of the Emperor. Teardrop had been home to a rebel listening post, but it was already abandoned by the time 3rd Steel Blade troops got there. 3rd Steel Blade needed something to show the Emperor they were fighting rebels, so the order came down to massacre a random town and say they were rebel sympathizers. This was at the point when Palpatine was trying to rush as many people into the Stormtrooper Corps so that he'd have as many faceless, mindlessly obedient killers as possible to carry out the Tarkin Doctrine, especially now that he'd lost the Death Star. But the Stormtrooper Corps had already been recruiting as many fanatic brutes as they could find for 10 years, so to expand their recruitment required recruiting people who weren't fanatic brutes. They might have been generally pro-imperial and sympathetic to authoritarian violence, but evidently they still had some lines they wouldn't cross. Just because they wore the armor and signed the contract didn't mean they were the same kind of stormtroopers as the original breed, the kind Palpatine was trying to get more of. More and more of them were really Imperial Army troopers wearing a stormtrooper uniform, and the Hand of Judgment was an early sign of that. On Shelkanwa, the Imperial Governor, the guy responsible for the bizarrely light-touch policies, conspired with the rebels in hopes of making Shelsha an independent sector. Some of his Imperial apparatchiks sold him out, though, and reinforcements arrived to crush the Nation Rebellion. Some stories say that Darth Vader and the 501st came in person, others that the Hand of Judgment was found by intergalactic woman of mystery Mara Jade, and they teamed up to bring the rebel governor down, and it's also possible that it was just 3rd Steel Blade's Grand Moff sending in a few Star Destroyers. I like to imagine it was Mara Jade, though, partly because I want Mara Jade to be real, but also because that would look really bad for 3rd Steel Blade. couldn't find any rebels to fight except for one listening post that was already abandoned, ordered a massacre to look busy, then the stormtroopers kill the guy who gave the order and team up with someone outside Oversector Command to put down a major sector-wide rebellion by a sector-level official in the 3rd Steel Blade chain of command. By the time Emperor Palpatine got finished reading that report, he'd be asking himself if it's possible to execute someone twice. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're looking at Shuai Sector in 3rd Steel Blade Command of the northern dependencies of the colonies. The planet Shuai lies at the intersection of the Hydean Way and the Shuai Exchange, and Uvioi Exen is just a bit further down the Hydean Way. This is where Zinj tried to punch through from his primary holdings in most of the 11th Blazing Claw and 10th Crimson Dagger to hit the core and re-establish the Empire soon after Jakku and the formal declaration of the New Republic on Coruscant. The Rebel-turned-Republic fleet's demilitarization had been officially signed into law by then, but it hadn't actually happened. Decommissioning battlecruisers takes time, so Zinj got smacked in the face by an almost fully intact Rebel fleet at Uvioi Exen and got sent packing back up the Hydean Way, and the Solo fleet got sent to chase him down. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're looking at the Zmach cluster and 3rd Steel Blade Command and the Slice in the Inner Rim. Getting the Zeku out of the way, the Zeku are allegedly the native species of planet Zekule, no described anatomy, so as usual I suspect they are a planetary demonym mistaken for a species name. The sector capital of Zmach cluster is Tiran, a trade world along the Hydean Way ruled by merchant princes. Its strategic position along the Hydean Way saw it conquered by the Tianese when they pushed far down the Hydean Way early in the Tianese War before slamming into the core and being quickly pushed back to the Mid-Rim and Outer Rim, where most of the war took place. Tiran was also briefly occupied by a CIS lunge far out of their territory in the Outer Rim early in the Clone Wars, during the chaotic era when the galaxy was so under-militarized and the CIS so much better prepared for the fight that they would drop droid armies on planets in the Inner Rim with the expectation that cracking the core was imminent, and then the next day a clone army came out of fucking nowhere, and suddenly the droids were no longer at the tip of the spear penetrating enemy territory, but cut off from friendly forces while deep in enemy territory. The droids got cleaned out of Tiran pretty quick, and 3rd Steel Blade went on to be a reserve force for the rest of the war, mostly deployed wherever forces were needed, although they did also do a lot of fighting on Kala. According to legend, Luke Skywalker, Leia Organa, and Han Solo visited Tiran soon after the Battle of Yavin, picking up supplies for the rebels during the Great Fair, a celebration of the planet's wealth, prosperity, and commerce, which was the perfect cover for making large purchases. So far, a pretty plausible milk run for rebel officers to be doing soon after Yavin, but then things go crazy. According to the story, a dark Jedi named Karis is hunting down Han Solo and sends Katuman warriors after him, a felinoid species that doesn't seem to actually exist, but if we're being generous, it might be some colloquial name for Cathar or Togorians. After the rebels escape, Han decides to settle up with Karis before this becomes a problem again, so they take the Falcon out to Karis' homeworld of Sky out in the Outer Rim. We're out of the Zmach cluster now, but this is a really implausible story that I want to drag across 2 sectors, so we're going to do it now. And Luke encounters old allies of Obi-Wan Kenobi in the locals who say that Obi-Wan was accompanied by 2 other Jedi during the days of the Republic. One was Darth Vader, and the other wielded Luke's lightsaber. So they're not saying that Anakin is confirmed to be Darth Vader, rather, they're saying that Darth Vader was a different Jedi who worked closely with Obi-Wan and Anakin, which means they're saying that Darth Vader was Ahsoka Tano. That definitely didn't happen.